to walk you home from school. Walk you home from school, baby.
Clark began his career as an assistant to his mother, going door to door photographing portraits of babies in people's homes. After studying photography between 1961 and 1963 in Wisconsin, he was drafted to the war in Vietnam. On his return, he began collating his archive of images and began to put together a publication that became Tulsa, released in 1971. The groundbreaking documentation of illicit adolescence in America shocked the public and kick-started Clark's career as an artist.
In 1901, the West was cattle country, and Tulsa was a cow town of 1,200 persons. Its single main street bustled with new settlers. Today, only on the screen can people of Tulsa see scenes like these. The romance, the adventure, and the hardships of the Old West departed from Tulsa many years ago. But now, in Western movies, these boys and girls can relive the history of Tulsa's past.
At the time, Tulsa was the epicenter of the status quo of America. It was a very proper place that strived to be an uber-moral community. The land was originally Indian territory, where tribes were relocated after the Indian Removal Act of 1830. They were eventually forced to surrender, and by 1892 the land became open to all individuals. During the 20s, it was also home to the Black Wall Street, an African-American community that flourished during earlier oil booms and became a breeding ground of jazz and blues. However, on the 31st of May 1921, a racially motivated massacre occurred, killing an estimated 300 people and destroying the area. The story was suppressed at the time, and many inhabitants of the area were not aware of the events that took place previously. This polluted past is evidence of how the Western can reinforce national myths. Tulsa remains Clark's most visceral book, an insider's view of a period in the mid-1960s when he was a teenager living what he calls, without irony, the outlaw life, shooting up speed, having sex with his strung-out girlfriends and hanging out with his gun-toting junkie friends. Sex, drugs and violence were captured in a raw, grainy monochrome that defined the raw confessional style adopted later by Nan Goldin, Corinne Day and Antoine de Agata. But Clark went there first, and Tulsa remains a template for all that followed, a blurring of the lines between voyeurism and intimate reportage, between honesty and exploitation. In the 5th and 6th centuries, England was subject to several invasions that pushed the earlier settlers up north. The Angles, Saxons and Jutes set up tribal villages with an early concept of justice. A man's worth was called his laga. If no compensation was made after an offence had been committed, the fugitive would lose his laga and therefore become worthless to society. He would become ut lagatus, an early term which later translates into the word outlaw. Every society has its outlaws. Tulsa is a modern take on an old classic, a glimpse into the human need to rebel. The history stretches further than the American gunslingers who may first come to mind. Think of Robin Hood, perhaps the most famous of them all, performing admirable raids in medieval England's deep forest. Alternatively, there is notable pirates like the ferocious Blackbeard, who terrorised the seas during the late 1600s, or the Prince of Highwaymen, Dick Turpin and his horse Black Bess, who haunted the developing roads surrounding London. On one hand, all these figures represent crime, violence and fear. On the other, they stand for fearlessness, independence and dedication. It was a long time before we got to the American outlaw ingrained in Western media. He gallops towards us on a magnificent black horse alone. His face is obscure, for his head is turned to look behind for pursuers. He holds a smoking revolver in one hand, and his saddlebags appear to be bulging with loot. This ominous rider may pose a grave danger. He threatens our security and safety. However, this outlaw also represents resistance to oppressive authority. He defies odious burdens imposed by corrupt society. The horseman should pass us by and disappear into the darkness, but he will certainly leave behind a feeling of excitement and a confused memory. Since the Declaration of Independence in 1776, the dream of freedom extended beyond being tied to the British Empire. It was a promise of cultural reform, where any man could seek to better his prospects through hard work under the protection of the law, which granted justice for all. The frontier became an endless opportunity to fulfill one's God-given right to expand and conquer. The philosophy is there, even within John Wayne's silent look at Dallas. His gaze at her carries, at its most concise and generous, the genre's argument about how to remake history and when to forget it. This rejection of truth can be seen in the Detroit Free Press's reaction to Tulsa's publishing, a devastating portrait of an American tragedy. It describes the subjects of the book as self-selected and self-destructing. The mind and body ultimately as hollow and used up as a rusting roadside beer can. Again, the people who America had forgotten about had become savages.
I started shooting amphetamine, and it was like a real secret back then. I mean, drugs were a secret. There wasn't supposed to be drugs in America.
This portrait of an American tragedy was an unfortunate reality for adolescents at the time. People were living the life depicted in Tulsa all over the country, yet they could not see themselves in America's collective identity. Whether it's the historical West or Tulsa in the 60s, outlaws were driven by rebellion. This is the USA seen from the inside, from its most hidden, fraying seams. Picture the cross-legged boy on the cover of Tulsa, say, with his pompadour, bare biceps and lovingly held gun, gracing the cover of a vintage juvenile delinquent genre paperback with a 25-cent price in the corner and a lurid banner promising a novel of today's wayward youth out for kicks.
All hail the American night. What was that? I don't know. Sounds like guns, thunder.
It comes as a great shock around the age of 5 or 6 or 7 to discover that the flag to which you have pledged allegiance, along with everybody else, has not pledged allegiance to you. It comes as a great shock to discover that Gary Cooper killing off the Indians when you were rooting for Gary Cooper, that the Indians were you. It comes as a great shock to discover that the country, which is your birthplace, and to which you owe your life and your identity, has not in its whole system of reality evolved any place for you.
They say every man must need protection. They say every man must fall. Yet I swear I see my reflection someplace so high above the wall. I see my light come shining from from the west down to the east. Any day now, I shall be released.
What Clark's images do is demystify the outlaw. The seedy underbelly of America is shown at its worst. The people photographed were not frontier heroes like Billy the Kid or Butch Cassidy. They were the kids next door. The image of the outlaw was manufactured through the lens of the Western. The big screen became a mirror, allowing America to understand itself and its history. It acted as a tool for reinforcing myths about American exceptionalism and negotiating cultural tensions around race and masculinity. The genre allowed society to escape from the realities of the Great Depression and the aftermath of the Civil War. By the 60s, the outlaw had entered suburbia. The narrative was changing. Eisenhower was president, and there wasn't supposed to be drugs and alcoholic parents and child abuse and incest, but I shot it. It was all around me.
I see my light come shining from the west down to the